Hey, it's Lemon. Welcome to the Backlogs. Question. With Diablo 4 being a literal trash fire that isn't even fun to watch, let alone play with, how do you scratch that ARPG itch? Did you say Last Epoch? I mean, yeah, sure, that's a solid choice, I guess. For those unaware, Last Epoch is an ARPG that's been in beta for a few years now, and finally released in all of its glory a few days ago. Unfortunately, I won't be showing off all the content available, since I received a key from the developers a few weeks ago on the condition that I do my best to break their game with firebombs. So yeah, thanks to 11th Hour Games for giving me an early access key to their game. I'm sorry in advance for any patches you'll need to make. If I'm being honest, I'm a little bummed that I didn't play with the full release, because there are a few subclasses that weren't available yet when I was recording. For our purposes, our class of choice will be the Rogue, which was missing the Falconer tree at the time. Which is a shame, because apparently the Falconer subclass has another explosive trap skill and quite a few passive skills that would have really helped with this run. But bad news for me is good news for you, because now the run will be that much harder, and if you ever decide you want to try this run for yourself, you'll have a much easier time of it than I did. You lucky scamp you. So with that said, it's time to find out. Can you beat Last Epoch with only firebombs? Alright, let's get this party started. Our Lady Rogue gives us a few sentences about her backstory, where she was apparently hired to murder the person who paid her. Needless to say, the vibe was all wrong, so we scuttled our way out of town. And that's where our journey begins. Welcome, everyone, to Last Epoch. Definitely a pretty game, no denying that. But I'm noticing a distinct lack of firebombs on screen at the moment. That's not quite what I meant. Man, really weird weather we're having today. Global warming really took a strange turn. Unfortunately, there's not a whole lot I can do at the moment except run away, as the only attacks I have are a basic sword attack and a skill that uses said sword, both of which are clearly not firebombs. Luckily for me though, there's a doorway to the next screen just up ahead, and the loading screen does me the kindness of keeping all the enemies I pass by from entering behind me. So, while we've got a minute to breathe, let's figure out exactly what we need to do to unlock our signature weapon of choice. First up, let's take a look at our skills. As you see, plenty of skills to unlock as we level up. Our current class is Rogue, which means our current focus is this half of the page here. And would you look at that? Acid Flasks. Each skill has its own upgrade tree, all of which affect how that particular skill operates. At the start, the Acid Flask will deal 47 poison damage to enemies and reduce their armor. However, if we move further into the tree, we can get to the point where our Acid Flasks become explosives, changing all their damage into fire and doing significantly more of it. Which, with further skilling, becomes Cluster Bombs, which deal even more fire damage, etc, etc, etc. So, we've got our goal. Only one problem. Unlocking Acid Flasks requires us to get to level 4, and we still don't have any way to attack. Luckily for us though, some of the enemies on this next screen don't appear to like each other very much, and wouldn't you know it, when they kill one another, I get the XP. You'll love to see it. I also found out that when I leave the area and come back, the enemies on both screens reset. Which means if we can find some enemies that like killing each other and are also nice and close to a doorway, then we've got the answer to our problem. I hang around this area a little longer just to prove my theory, gaining level 2 and a bag full of shurikens I'll never be able to use, then decide to push forward a bit further into the level in search of greener pastures. And would you look at that? Is that a helpful NPC I see? Our new friend here is named Grail, and he... Alright, rude. Well, normally I'm the one who demands to skip the story, but I guess Last Epoch beat me to it. No skin off my back. In other news, Grail is doing a fantastic job carrying me to level 4. I unlocked the shift skill, which is essentially just a teleport, and also get my first passive skill point. Right now, all we can pour into is the Rogue tree, but later on we'll be able to choose a subclass and put points there as well. I put a point into Swift Assassin, due to it increasing my physical throwing damage, then continue escorting Grail around the map, making sure he has plenty of targets to choose from at any given time. And before you know it, Grail has racked up a large enough body count that I reached level 4. Which means Acid Flasks are back on the menu, boys. First things first, how does this work? Okay, simple enough. Press button, throw bomb. Hit an enemy with said bomb, and they take some initial damage and a good healthy dose of damage over time on top of it. Fire and forget. Reaching level 4 also lets me start to specialize in a skill of my choice, which basically means that for every kill I make, the skill in question will gain its own XP, eventually allowing me to unlock the upgrades we so desperately crave. Naturally, I chose the Acid Flask as my skill of choice, but decided to hold off on choosing an upgrade for now. Considering we've only just gotten them, I wanted to play around with the flasks a bit first. And what better way to test them than by going after the first boss, the Forged Soldier. My bombs take a lot of mana to use, so I can't just spam them, but the good news is that I really don't have to. As you can see, the poison damage I keep applying stacks, which means so long as I just throw bombs at a semi-regular pace, the Forged Soldier will take continuous damage. And just like that, that's the first boss down. Moving right along. Grail and I make it to a makeshift campsite full of other people, and decide to head our separate ways. And it's here that I get my first glimpse at the map. Ooh, boy. Okay, that's a bit larger than I was expecting. Wait, what's all this up here? Oh no. Oh no. Oh god, what is all this? Well, guess we're in it for the long haul. Better keep things moving. I stop at the blacksmith to sell all of my useless items and buy a few items that actually boost my acid flash damage. Talk to Keeper Lena, who is a council member of some kind, and ask me to help find her fellow council member, Balthus, then push forward into the world itself. Lots of enemies to melt to death out here. It's pretty much exactly what you'd expect from an ARPG. You've got base enemies with special modifiers, like haste, that make it so that you just can't mash your face against the keyboard and expect to win, lots and lots of loot for you to sift through, and plenty of skills to pour over for synergies. At this point, I decided it was probably best if I started upgrading my flasks, and after languishing over what to pick for several minutes, eventually just put 2 points into the corrosive upgrade, which increased the damage of my bombs by 10% each point. Normally, I wouldn't think too hard about it, but because changing my acid flasks into firebombs later down the line will negate a few upgrades on the tree, it's important that we pick the ones that will help us both now and later. I make my way to a nearby fortress, melting down a few sunbros while I'm there, then go up against the next boss of the run, Styriax the Burning Sky. And unlike the first boss we fought, it doesn't go very well. Turns out standing in the danger zones is a bad idea. Who'd have thought? A nice feature of the game is that it tells you exactly how you died, listing what enemy killed you, what attack finished you off, and what damage type the attack was. This could definitely be very helpful to know if you're struggling with a fight, since this removes the guesswork and helps you decide if a build rework is necessary or not. 2 other things of note. It doesn't look like bosses regenerate health between deaths, and as far as I can tell, there's no penalty for dying, so throwing yourself at a boss repeatedly is absolutely a strategy, and will only cost your sanity. Joke's on you, Epoch. I lost my sanity years ago. The only thing you'll get from me is my time. Wait, I force my way inside the fortress, and bump into another Forged Soldier. He's a bit harder when I don't have Grail to hide behind, but not by much. Hey buddy, I cleared out all the enemies in the storage room. Seriously? What is it with this game and not wanting me to pay attention to the story? Well, whatever. With that quest completed, I've unlocked my smoke bomb ability, which creates a cloud of smoke that makes me move faster and also makes it harder for enemies to hit me. Might be useful. And after sprinting my way to a nearby vault where Balthus is desperately trying to protect something, I gain a few more passive points to throw around. After realizing I was being dumb, I've been putting all my points into Steady Hand, since it gives me dexterity, which my bombs scale with, and health. Win-win. And after being completely overwhelmed with how much loot I've been picking up this whole time, I realized that I actually have unlimited teleports back to headquarters, and decided to go sell everything that I've been collecting. Then it's back into the vault, where I find Balthus being attacked from all sides by multiple waves of enemies. Sorry bud, but you're going up against firebomb variants. If you had about 6 more of yourself and another 10 waves of enemies, maybe you would have been able to fend me off. Still a pretty hard maybe though. And after going on an absolute killing spree inside the vault, I reached level 8, which lets me specialize in another skill. I eventually decided on Smoke Bomb, because being able to evade is always nice, and added the Lingering Fumes upgrade, which just makes the smoke cloud last longer. And with every living thing inside the vault now no longer living, Balthus and I escape back into the fresh air. Whew, you sure are lucky I was here, Balthus. Without me, you'd probably be stolen by a hippogriff or something. Balthus? It's always something. Fine, you know what? I'll just rush inside the enemy war camp on my own. Someone's gotta get the old man out of there. And after blowing up entire squadrons of minions and popping several loot pinatas, I arrive at the boss of the camp, Haruspex Orion. This fight is much different than the others. Not only does this boss have multiple attacks between both the griffin and its rider, but I just feel much more engaged, which is great. With my current build, things aren't too bad, since I can actually use my shift ability to warp out of the danger zones. But this does mean I have to slow down and pay attention, because the last thing I need to do is throw too many firebombs and not have enough mana to warp away from an incoming flamethrower attack. And after a few minutes of constantly stacking up the damage over time effects, Orion melts away to nothing more than a massive pile of loot. Which, after sorting through it all and playing around with different items and armors, brings my flash damage up to 152. Not bad. Not bad at all. And with Balthus returned to camp, my participation in the story is over. Balthus gives my head a pat for good luck before I leave, and... wait, no, please, I'm just a side character! Well, this isn't where I parked my carriage. I don't know what Balthus did, but judging by the shard laying there on the ground, and the fountain I was standing on now being covered in dark tendrils, I have an educated guess that it wasn't anything good. So for those of you who weren't aware, like myself, Last Epoch is a time travel game. All those tabs we saw on the map earlier, those are different time periods we'll be traveling to. Get pumped. So with that said, it's time for Chapter 2. The enemies here are all monsters from the Void, very dark and spooky. I gain another point in Acid Flask, which I use to make the splash zone bigger, then find myself fighting my way across bridges, trying to make my way to the nearest safe zone. At this point, my flasks are still doing plenty of damage, but I'm starting to notice a problem. When things get really hectic and I forget to pay close attention, my mana tends to run out pretty quickly, which isn't great, since having negative mana means I lose all of my offensive and defensive skills. But eventually, I make my way to the safe zone, where I'm told I need to go find an elder who has a shard like mine. Apparently, if we use them together, we might be able to drive off the void. I also unlock idol slots, which, as the name implies, are slots where I can put idols. Idols will give you passive buffs while you've got them installed, but the slots open up in an odd formation, so you'll have to play Inventory Organizer to get the most out of it. I melt a few more dozens of enemies, give some guy a book that definitely wasn't his, and basically just kill anything that attacks me first, while slowly moving towards whatever objective is currently on my radar. And after getting mildly distracted by a few side quests, I arrive outside the Elder's study, where his corrupted students are waiting for me. I'd say it was tricky because I had to contend with 3 different bosses at the same time, but my build is actually better at fighting multiple bosses than it is against singular ones. All I have to do is throw 1 or 2 bombs, then reposition myself to safety while my mana recharges, and the damage over time will do all the work. And without too much effort, the students of the void go down. Moving right along. I take the experience I gain from them to max out my next passive, Lethal Cadence, which makes it so that every 3rd bomb I throw will deal 100% more damage. I also decided it was high time we started moving towards actual firebombs, and put a point into Hindering Mixture, which makes it so that my bombs now slow enemies down a bit. Which is great and all, but it's also just the shortest path to unlocking the fire of my firebombs. So, you know. At this point, I've also unlocked my subclass. Considering we couldn't choose the Falconer at the time, I only had 2 choices, the Blade Dancer and the Marksman. As weird as it sounds, I went with the Blade Dancer subclass, because while I won't be putting a whole lot of points into this tree, the few points I do put in would give me better throwing damage and the chance for my bombs to start causing bleed. The Marksman subclass, unfortunately, seems to mostly require that you have a bow equipped at all times to get the most out of it, and all the bows I've seen thus far have not been good at increasing my firebomb damage. So that's a no-go, because at the end of the day, this build is more of a mage than anything else. I don't need daggers and bows, I need staves that give me a larger mana pool and more skill damage. I find a giant worm thing blocking my path, but unfortunately, between all of my stacking damage over time that I've got going on, it doesn't stand much of a chance, and goes down in less than a minute. Wow, that's a lot of loot. How many people did you swallow, my guy? Oh hey, a mysterious and slightly less ominous rift. Should I touch it? I'm gonna touch it. And 1 Windows XP screensaver later, we've arrived. Not sure where we've arrived, but I can at least tell you when. The Ancient Era, apparently. Please let this mean I get to fight dinosaurs. Oh yeah, we got dinosaurs. Yeah, dinosaur ARPG time. Wait, oh, that was like a single screen. Dinosaur time is over already? Unfortunately, yeah. Turns out, we tend to use the Ancient Era more as a way to get around obstacles than anything else, which is a bummer. But there weren't exactly many quest givers back when dinosaurs roamed the earth, so it's fine, I guess. 1 boss fight consisting of increasing enemy waves and 1 lava-spewing tanky boy later, and we've officially cleared the armory, which not only nets me a boatload of new idols to play around with, but also means I can now start crafting. Oh god, there's crafting in this game? At this point in the run, I was starting to feel overwhelmed. I'm a simple man from the Diablo 1 era, and all these systems within systems and piles of loot are kinda too much for me. And while I'm just going to have to tough it out and learn all the systems in the game if I want to maximize my ability, I was able to find a loot filter in the settings. And boy oh boy is this thing useful. You can tell the game exactly what you're looking for when loot explodes out of the enemies. Don't want any common items? Done. Tired of getting drops that only other classes can use? Not a problem. And on it goes. You can add a ridiculous number of rules to your filter, rearrange their priority, and even share your filter with other players or copy other players' filters. What a time to be alive. This was a much needed feature, and I'm glad I found it when I did. Constantly stopping to check every item that fell on the ground was really killing my flow, and while I'm sure I could have made my filters much stronger and gotten a much better result, the few rules I did add made moving through the levels much less tedious. Big props. Every ARPG and MMO should have something like this. So with that problem solved, let's move on to crafting. Turns out it's less like crafting and more like upgrading the equipment you already have. I won't even bother trying to explain all the stuff you can probably do with it, but suffice it to say that the materials I've been collecting as I've been playing can now be used to make all the passive effects on my equipment better. Which is great, because now I don't have to sit here praying for the perfect piece of equipment to drop, I can just slowly upgrade the pieces I do have, which, while not perfect, will at the very least help me keep pace with the game's difficulty curve. Oh hey, look, it's that Elder I've been searching for. And he's a beastie now. Cool. The Elder himself isn't that hard, but is definitely another one of those fights where you need to pay attention to his moves, save your mana for emergencies, and just take your time as you melt down his health bar. And after a few minutes of slowly building corrosion, that's all there is to it. Another first try boss. Let's go. Through another wormhole, and we've arrived at the end of time. I think I've completely lost the plot. Oh, good, the game knows. This knight tells me that jumping across timelines is dangerous business, and I need to go talk to Elder Gaspar if I want to keep my sanity intact. Here's hoping he isn't a void monster too. I also talked to someone named Agony, who tells me that by traveling back in time, I might be able to restore timelines and keep them from reaching this point. Look, Agony, if that is your real name, I am literally just some lady who walked into the wrong camp at the wrong time. If you think I'm gonna, I find Elder Gaspar, who is in fact not a void monster, and he helps me pick a subclass. As mentioned earlier in the video, I didn't have access to the Falconer subclass at the time, so Blade Dancer is the next best thing. Time to go save some timelines. Into the warp, and out into a time called the Ruined Era. I'm sure it's fine. Yeah, see? Plenty of things going on in this timeline. We've got the Lightless Arbor, and the Cultist Camp, and, the Corrupted Lake. Okay, so I might have underestimated the damage a little bit. Well, time to do what we do best. Explode everything. And the first thing I'm noticing is that the enemies here are a bit harder than they were in the last timeline. Quite a bit harder, in fact. We may be a bit underleveled and or undergeared. Thankfully, experience gain is large and enemy density is heavy, so it won't be too long before we're caught up. I hope. And after a few minutes of screaming and throwing explosives, I found the exit to the woods, blundering my way into Chapter 3. If we're going to keep pushing, I'm going to need some better gear and skills. Things like these gloves that increase my throwing damage and dodge rating, this rogue skill that straight up adds bleed damage to every third acid flask I throw, and a staff that adds 44% physical damage and 12 spell damage to my bombs. Now, I'm a simple man, and I can't do that kind of math in my head, but thankfully I don't have to. I just check on the skill's damage in my skill tree, swap out my current build with the one that better accommodates the staff, and there you go, an extra 100 damage or so. Yes please. We'll be here all day if we talk about every single item I picked up, so just know this. Things are ramping up, but Last Epoch seems to be doing a good job of helping me keep pace. There are spikes of difficulty if you aren't careful, which probably isn't helped by the fact that I'm not able to use most of my skills, but after the difficulty spikes, the game tends to mellow back out, either because you're leveling up fast from the increased difficulty, or because you find an item that really helps your build, like this armor that gives me a free point in Acid Flask. Just one more point and we can have our Firebombs. I can almost taste the gunpowder. I unlock another skill specialization, which I very quickly jam my shift ability into, and find out that I've been sleeping on one of my better support skills. Now, whenever I shift, my next pot does bleed damage automatically, on top of the bleed damage I get with every third pot. Stacks on stacks. Which is good, because the bosses are starting to get a bit beefier, and the faster I can melt them down, the better. Moving right along, yeah, I'll be honest, I've lost track of what I'm doing again. But that's okay, because dinosaurs! And dragons! Apparently. Fine by me. So long as I can make it explode, I don't care what this game puts me up against. I also really enjoy the fact that this game knows that there are players like me who aren't actively devouring the story, and gives me the option to skip most of the story bits. Quite literally in some cases. And it's not my intention to downplay the storyline. I'm sure I'd enjoy it if I was in the proper headspace for it. But when you give me firebombs, everything else kinda falls to the wayside. I'm sure I'll pay attention to the plot when I do a Thorns only run. Probably. But until then, guess what I just unlocked? I'll give you a hint, it's the whole reason we're here. Firebombs. Honest to goodness, fully explosive, fiery inferno firebombs. Time to see if we can't save this world by burning it to the ground, yeah? I fiddle with my build a bit, since I've been quietly saving any and all items that might help me increase my fire damage up to this point, then push forward. But here's the thing, while my firebombs are stronger, they aren't stronger by much, mainly due to the fact that a lot of the upgrades that would make them immensely stronger are going to require further levels in Acid Flask. On top of this, they also take a bit more mana to cast, so I had to lose a bit of damage output in order to increase my mana regeneration. So while we aren't killing things in a single hit, yet, we at least have the added bonus of being able to throw more firebombs before running out of mana. Which sounds like a pretty mediocre trade, until you remember that my firebombs have all sorts of stacking effects. We may not have more damage, but we do have more damage over time. On to the next boss. I fight off the Emperor's remains, which is easier done than said, and collect what appears to be another shard of the Epoch. And after talking to Elder Gaspar, it turns out that this Emperor guy is the big bad, who, in his pursuit for immortality, unleashes the void upon the world. Which means we need to do the time travel thing where we go back in time and stop him before things get out of hand. Which means we can now begin Chapter 4, and a new timeline. I do some crafting to make sure my equipment is keeping pace, upgrade my firebombs so they now do 3 explosions instead of just 1, which works exactly as well as you'd think it would, then just do as you normally do. Killing new enemy types and collecting all the goodies I can to increase my build. another Firebomb upgrade to make them do even more fire damage over time, more gear that gives me more damage, and boatloads of new enemies, up to and including a giant soul cannon, because that's a thing now. And it's right about here where I got the skill that took this entire game and broke it over my knee. Critical opening. After using shift, the next attack is always a critical strike. Just dodge away, throw a single bomb, and laugh as the XP rolls in. And believe you me, there is no mistake in the way that upgrade text was written. Whenever you shift, even if it's in another area, the next attack you make will crit. Which means my build very quickly evolved into using shift to charge up a crit anytime I had a moment of peace, then using said crit as soon as I entered the next encounter, making it so that I always started each encounter with a critical hit and a full mana bar. Now, to my discredit, it took me a good while to realize the power I had in my hands, and I definitely struggled through another boss or two before the understanding truly kicked in. Thankfully, the realization was pretty immediate after I saw my Firebomb damage jump from 200 damage to over 1000, and it was all downhill from there. Spymaster What's-His-Face? Dead. Mystical battle between literal gods of this earth? Witnessed. A legendary belt that lets me hold 16 health potions at one time? Obtained. And Wengari Matriarch casually melted in her own home. It wasn't until I went up against the God of Storms himself that I had any inkling of trouble, and even then, I could have beaten it with ease due to accidentally discovering a bug where you could just shift out of the mini arena the boss creates. Let me just put a bug report here, and let's go ahead and add a screenshot so the devs know what to look for, and there you go. Bug squashed. In the interest of playing the game as intended, I did fight Lagon properly, and to his credit, it took me several tries to figure out his patterns, resulting in more deaths here than anywhere else in the game. His second phase was also pretty tricky, since it introduces waves of enemies into the mix, as well as some tidal waves that would kill me in one hit. But these two have a pattern, and once I figured this out, it was off to the races. And after handily defeating Lagon's third phase, that's all she wrote. Only one more boss of note to go. Not gonna lie, the last few levels were a real pain for my build, considering the enemies here attack quickly, can attack from range or melee distance, and have hives around the map that spawn them in ridiculous quantities, which meant if I couldn't reach the spawners fast enough, I was very quickly overwhelmed by the sheer volume of incoming damage alone. But it was a lesson very rapidly learned, and a problem very easily handled with some quick shifting and a well-placed firebomb. And between my massive damage and equally massive health pot supply, everything else in the area went down without much effort. And so, after hours of explosions and thousands of singed corpses piled up on every timeline, it's finally time for the last boss, Majasa, the goddess of opulence. Sorry, my dear, but we only have one goddess in this academy, and you ain't it. Phase 1 consists of dodging Majasa's attacks and staying out of danger zones, and boy howdy can she make some danger zones. You've got Medusa Vision, which will turn you to stone if you don't get out of it quickly enough, all sorts of elemental projectiles that you need to dodge while simultaneously avoiding the danger zone she's already made around the map, and then there's her attack that summons 3 individual pylons that attack you simultaneously, which you'll want to remove as quickly as possible because Majasa comes right back after summoning them and will do all the attacks I just mentioned while the pylons are active. Credit where credit is due, Majasa recognizes the threat when she sees one, and she isn't fucking around. Also worth noting, much like several of the other big name bosses, she regenerates all of her health every time you die. So you can't pull a Diablo 2 and just corpse run to victory. It's do or die, no in-betweens. But, after about half an hour of attempts, Majasa finally crumples to my damage over time. But remember how I mentioned that was phase 1? Yeah, no, that was only phase 1. Time to learn the patterns of phase 2. Well, alright then. Thankfully, Last Epoch doesn't force you to fight through all of phase 1 again, and even lets you keep the damage you did on the boss so long as you don't leave the arena when it respawns you. So if you're willing to keep your current build and try again, you can jump right back into the fight. Unfortunately for me though, this phase of the fight is incredibly hard. Majasa's switched from a ranged focus to a melee one, and my build tends to work best when I can create some distance, which means my strategy for this phase consisted of just going ham on the firebomb button while simultaneously chugging every health pot I had as quickly as I could. An inelegant solution, but a solution nonetheless. And with one final gasp, that's it. Majasa's defeated, and the campaign is over. At least, it is for now. We weren't able to hunt down Majasa's counterpart, Apophis, and judging by the way Agony is fourth walling at me, it sounds like the story isn't quite done yet and will finish in future updates. At this point, I've reached the endgame. I could dive into new timelines that offer higher challenges and higher rewards, you know, the usual ARPG dopamine drip, but I think that's enough for now. So there you have it, Last Epoch, defeated with only firebombs. That was a good time. I know I kind of blurred through the last several chapters there, but because I kind of blanked on the story, there wasn't much more to say outside of my numbers got bigger and everything's on fire. That, and I didn't want to spoil much, considering it might be a brand new game for anyone who hasn't played the beta. Thanks again to the devs for giving me a key and for sending me this challenge. Always good to see the Firebomb Academy flourishing in a new game. And with Last Epoch officially released now, who knows? We might have to look into another challenge run or two. Thorns Only is always a fun way to play an ARPG, and as I said before, it might make it a bit easier to absorb the story if I'm not trying to understand all the numbers and mechanics the game has to offer at the same time. But until then, that's all I've got. Take care of yourselves, be good to one another, and I'll see you all again soon.